Marcus Wellington III had everything money could buy, but tonight, nothing felt right. The 42-year-old real estate mogul sat in his Mercedes-Benz S-Class, engine purring outside the Moonlight Motel on the outskirts of downtown. His hands gripped the steering wheel as conflicting emotions tore through his chest like sharp daggers. 3 months had passed since he'd discovered his wife's affair with his business partner, and the divorce papers were still sitting unsigned on his mahogany desk at home. The woman beside him shifted nervously, her red dress catching the neon glow from the motel's flickering sign. Sophia wasn't like the other women who threw themselves at him during charity galas and country club events. She was different, mysterious, with haunting green eyes that seemed to hold secrets deeper than his own pain. They'd met at a coffee shop that morning, and something about her vulnerability had drawn him in like a moth to flame. Perhaps it was the way she'd looked so lost, or maybe it was how she'd listened without judgment when he'd opened up about his crumbling marriage. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant traffic. Her fingers traced the edge of her purse, and Marcus noticed her hands trembling slightly. There was something familiar about her mannerisms, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, but he couldn't place it. The streetlight cast shadows across her face, making her appear younger and more fragile than her 30-something years suggested. Marcus had spent the entire day questioning his motives. Was this revenge against his wife? Was it loneliness? Or was it something deeper, a desperate attempt to feel alive again after months of emotional numbness? His empire worth millions meant nothing when he returned to an empty mansion each night, haunted by echoes of broken promises and shattered dreams. The silence had become unbearable, and Sophia's unexpected companionship offered a brief escape from the suffocating reality of his failed marriage. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "Nothing makes sense anymore. Everything I built, everything I believed in, it all feels like a lie." He turned to look at her, studying the way moonlight reflected in her eyes. "My wife, my partner, they destroyed everything. 20 years of marriage gone. My daughter won't even speak to me because she thinks I'm the villain in this story." Sophia reached over and placed her hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly warm and comforting. "Sometimes we need to make mistakes to find our way back to who we really are," she said softly. "Sometimes the pain we're running from is exactly what we need to face." Her words carried weight, as if she spoke from experience, from her own well of suffering. The motel room key felt cold in Marcus's palm as they walked toward room 237. His heart hammered against his rib cage, not from excitement, but from a growing sense that this moment would change everything. The gravel crunched beneath their feet, and the sound seemed amplified in the quiet night. Other guests' muffled conversations drifted from nearby rooms, creating a symphony of human secrets and hidden encounters. As they approached the door, Marcus hesitated. His wedding ring, which he still wore despite everything, caught the light from the overhead bulb. The gold band felt heavier tonight, like a chain binding him to a past that no longer existed. He thought about his daughter Emma, now 22 and studying abroad, who had stopped calling after learning about the divorce proceedings. He thought about his mother-in-law, who had always treated him like the son she never had, and how disappointed she would be if she knew where he was tonight. "Once we go in there, there's no going back," he said, more to himself than to Sophia. His voice carried the weight of a man standing at a crossroads, knowing that each path led to irreversible consequences. Sophia nodded slowly, her own eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and determination. "Maybe that's exactly what we both need," she replied. "Maybe we both need to stop going back." Marcus inserted the key into the lock, the metallic click echoing like a gunshot in the silence. As the door swung open, revealing the dimly lit interior, neither of them could have imagined the devastating revelation waiting just moments away. The motel room was exactly what Marcus had expected. Worn carpet, faded wallpaper, and the lingering scent of disinfectant mixed with decades of secrets. A single lamp cast amber light across the space, creating intimate shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. Sophia moved toward the window, her silhouette graceful against the thin curtains, while Marcus stood frozen near the entrance, his hand still gripping the door handle, as if part of him wanted to flee. "I need a moment," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned away from him, her shoulders trembling slightly. "This isn't. I've never done anything like this before." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Marcus felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt wash over him. At least he wasn't the only one stepping into uncharted territory, abandoning principles that had once seemed unshakable. Marcus loosened his tie, the silk sliding through his fingers like water. His expensive suit felt out of place in this modest room, a stark reminder of the world he was trying to escape. "We don't have to do this," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The truth was, he needed this distraction, this human connection, even if it was built on mutual brokenness and desperation. "We could just talk. Sometimes that's enough." Sophia turned to face him, and in the lamplight, Marcus noticed tears glistening in her eyes. "My life fell apart 6 months ago," she began, her voice cracking with emotion. "I lost everything. My job, my apartment, my dignity. I've been staying with family, but it's complicated. So complicated that sometimes I wonder if disappearing would be easier than facing another day." The raw honesty in her confession struck Marcus like a physical blow. Here was someone who understood loss, who knew what it felt like to watch everything you'd built crumble into dust. "What happened?" he asked, moving closer to her, his own pain temporarily forgotten in the face of her obvious suffering. "I trusted the wrong person," she said simply. "Someone I loved, someone I thought loved me back. They took everything, my savings, my business, my faith in people. Left me with nothing but debt and shame." She laughed bitterly, wiping away a tear. "Funny how betrayal can make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself." Marcus felt an unexpected surge of protective anger. "Whoever did that to you deserves to pay," he said, surprised by the intensity of his own emotion. "No one should have to carry that kind of pain alone." "And what about you?" Sophia asked, studying his face with those penetrating green eyes. What kind of betrayal brought a millionaire to a motel room with a stranger? Marcus sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling every one of his 42 years. "My wife was sleeping with my business partner for over a year," he said, the words still tasting bitter on his tongue. "Not just sleeping, they were planning to take over my company, to push me out of everything I'd spent 2 decades building. When I confronted them, they had the audacity to tell me it was my fault, that I'd been emotionally unavailable, that I'd driven them together." The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of shared understanding. 2 broken souls seeking solace in each other's company. 2 people who had discovered that money and success meant nothing when trust was shattered and love turned to betrayal. "Maybe we're both running from the same thing," Sophia said softly. "The fear that we'll never be able to trust again, that we'll never be able to open our hearts without wondering when the next knife will fall." A soft knock at the door interrupted their moment of connection. Both Marcus and Sophia froze, their eyes meeting in sudden alarm. The knock came again, more insistent this time, followed by a woman's voice calling out, "Room service. I have fresh towels for you." Marcus frowned. He hadn't requested any towels, and the motel's amenities were hardly the type that included proactive housekeeping. "We didn't order anything," he called back, but the knocking persisted. "Please, sir, it'll just take a moment," the voice insisted. "Hotel policy requires fresh linens for all guests." Sophia backed away from the door, her face pale with sudden anxiety. Something in her expression set off alarm bells in Marcus's mind, but before he could process what was happening, he was already reaching for the handle, ready to face whatever waited on the other side. Marcus turned the handle and pulled the door open, expecting to see a tired motel employee with an armload of towels. Instead, he found himself staring into the shocked face of Patricia Coleman, his mother-in-law of 20 years. The woman who had welcomed him into her family with open arms, who had called him son, who had stood by his side at his wedding and held his hand during his father's funeral. The woman whose daughter had just destroyed his life. Time seemed to freeze as recognition dawned in Patricia's eyes. The stack of towels in her arms tumbled to the ground, white terry cloth spreading across the threshold like fallen snow. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. Behind Marcus, he heard Sophia gasp, a sound so sharp and pained it seemed to cut through the air itself. "Marcus!" Patricia's voice was barely a whisper, her hand instinctively reaching up to touch her chest, as if to steady her racing heart. "What are you? How are you?" Her eyes moved past him into the room, taking in the intimate lighting, the rumpled bedspread where he'd been sitting, and then landing on the figure of Sophia, who had pressed herself against the far wall like a cornered animal. The silence stretched between them, pregnant with implications and unspoken questions. Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis, the already fragile foundations of his reality cracking further under the weight of this impossible coincidence. Of all the motels in the city, of all the nights he could have chosen, of all the people who could have knocked on that door, why her? Why Patricia, the woman who had been more of a mother to him than his own absent parent? "Patricia, I can explain," Marcus began, though he had no idea what explanation could possibly make sense of this situation. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, hollow and desperate. "This isn't what it looks like." But even as he spoke the words, he knew how pathetic they sounded. What else could this look like? A married man in a motel room with a woman who wasn't his wife, caught by his mother-in-law who was apparently working the night shift at a seedy establishment. The absurdity of it would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, and Marcus saw 20 years of relationship crumbling in real time. "I took this job 3 months ago," she said, her voice breaking. "After Helen told me about the divorce. After she said you'd become cold and distant. I needed the work, needed something to keep me busy while I watched my family fall apart." She shook her head, gray hair catching the hallway light. I never thought I'd find you here, like this." Behind Marcus, Sophia made a sound that was half sob, half moan. When he turned to look at her, he saw that she had slumped against the wall, her face buried in her hands. Her whole body was shaking, and for a moment, Marcus forgot his own mortification in the face of her obvious distress. There was something about her reaction that seemed disproportionate to the situation, something that suggested deeper currents of pain and recognition. "Please don't tell Helen," Marcus heard himself say, hating the pleading tone in his voice, but unable to stop himself. "She's already taken everything from me. If she finds out about this, she'll use it against me in the divorce. She'll make sure I never see Emma again." Patricia's expression shifted from shock to something that might have been disappointment, or perhaps pity. "Oh, Marcus," she said softly, "what have you become? The man I knew, the man who married my daughter, would never have put himself in this position, would never have asked me to lie for him." The weight of her words hit him like physical blows. She was right, of course. The old Marcus, the man who had built an empire on integrity and hard work, would have been appalled by his current situation. But that man had died 3 months ago when he'd walked into his office and found his wife and best friend planning his professional execution. From inside the room came another sound from Sophia, this time unmistakably a sob. Patricia's attention shifted to her, and something flickered across the older woman's face. Not recognition exactly, but a kind of dawning awareness that made the air itself seem to thicken with tension. Patricia stepped into the room without invitation, her eyes fixed on Sophia with an intensity that made Marcus's blood run cold. The older woman moved slowly, deliberately, like someone approaching a wild animal or a ghost. Sophia's sobbing had quieted to ragged breathing, but she kept her face buried in her hands, her body pressed against the wall as if she could somehow disappear into the faded wallpaper. "Look at me," Patricia said, her voice carrying a strange mixture of authority and disbelief. "Please look at me." Marcus watched in confusion as the two women faced each other across the small room. Something was happening here that he didn't understand, currents of recognition and history flowing beneath the surface of this already surreal encounter. Sophia slowly raised her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, and when her green eyes met Patricia's brown ones, the older woman gasped as if she'd been struck. "Sarah Elizabeth Coleman," Patricia whispered, using a name that made Marcus's world tilt even further off its axis. "My God, what have you done to yourself?" The revelation hit Marcus like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah, Patricia's youngest daughter, Helen's sister, his sister-in-law, whom he hadn't seen in over 5 years, not since she'd disappeared after that terrible fight with the family. The woman he'd nearly slept with, the woman he confided his deepest pain to, was his wife's sister. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity, the familiar mannerisms, the way she'd listened so intently to his story of betrayal, the haunted look in her eyes that had drawn him to her. "I'm not Sarah anymore," Sophia said, her voice barely audible. "Sarah died 5 years ago when her own family cast her out for loving the wrong person. Sarah died when no one believed her, when everyone chose sides and left her with nothing." Patricia moved closer, her hands reaching out instinctively before falling back to her sides. "We looked for you," she said, tears now flowing freely down her weathered cheeks. "After the funeral, after everything settled down, we tried to find you. Your father regretted what he said, how he reacted. Helen regretted it too, at first." Marcus felt like he was drowning in revelations, each new piece of information pulling him deeper into a nightmare of his own making. The funeral, he remembered now. Patricia's husband, Sarah's father, had died suddenly of a heart attack 6 years ago. Sarah had brought her girlfriend to the service, had introduced her as her partner, and the family had erupted in accusations and rejections. Old-fashioned values clashing with modern reality, grief and shock making everyone say things they couldn't take back. "Helen never regretted it," Sarah said bitterly. "She made sure of that. She told me I was an embarrassment, that I was destroying what little was left of the family after Dad's death. She said I was selfish for choosing that moment to announce my lifestyle choices." The words dripped with pain and resentment that had clearly festered for years. "And when Rebecca left me, when she couldn't handle the family drama and the financial pressure, Helen made sure I knew it was all my fault." The room felt suffocating now, thick with years of unspoken hurt and misunderstanding. Marcus realized he was witnessing the collision of 2 separate tragedies, his own and Sarah's, that had somehow led them to this moment of mutual destruction. The cosmic cruelty of it was almost unbearable. "You changed your name," Patricia said, not a question but a statement heavy with grief. "You changed everything about yourself." "I had to survive," Sarah replied, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Sarah Coleman was a privileged girl who believed in family and fairness and happy endings. Sophia Martinez is a woman who knows that sometimes you have to reinvent yourself completely to keep breathing. Marcus found his voice at last, though it came out as little more than a croak. "The woman who betrayed you," he said, the pieces clicking together with horrible certainty. "The one who took your money, your business, your faith in people. That was Rebecca." Sarah nodded, her eyes closing as if the admission physically hurt her. "She came back into my life 2 years ago, convinced me she'd changed, that she'd always regretted leaving. I gave her access to everything, my heart, my bank accounts, my business partnerships. She cleaned me out and disappeared with her real girlfriend, someone she'd been seeing the whole time." The weight of the revelation settled over the 3 of them like a suffocating blanket. Marcus sank back onto the bed, his legs no longer able to support him as the full magnitude of the situation crashed down around him. He had spent the evening seeking solace from his wife's betrayal in the arms of her sister, a sister who had been cast out by the same family that was now tearing him apart. The symmetry was so cruel, so perfectly designed to cause maximum damage, that it felt like the universe itself was conspiring against them. Patricia moved to the single chair in the corner, her movements those of an elderly woman who had suddenly aged a decade in the span of minutes. "Helen doesn't know you're alive," she said to Sarah, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "After you disappeared, she convinced herself that cutting you out was the right thing to do. She said it was protecting the family reputation, protecting the business connections your father had worked so hard to build. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, only bitterness that had been fermenting for years. Of course she did. Helen was always good at rewriting history to make herself the hero. She probably tells people I died along with Dad, doesn't she? One less complication to explain to her country club friends. That's not fair, Patricia said, though her protest lacked conviction. She was grieving. We all were. Your father's death, and then finding out about your relationship at the funeral. It was too much change too fast. Marcus listened to this family drama unfold, feeling like an intruder in a conversation that was 5 years overdue. But he couldn't escape the growing realization that his presence here wasn't coincidence. It was the inevitable conclusion of a series of betrayals and abandonments that stretched back years. Helen's coldness toward him, her ability to discard their marriage without apparent remorse, her willingness to destroy him professionally. It all made sense now. She had practice at cutting people out of her life. She's doing the same thing to Marcus that she did to me, Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. She's rewriting the narrative, making him the villain so she can walk away clean. She's probably already told people that he was neglectful, that he drove her into another man's arms. She's building her case for why the betrayal was justified. The accuracy of Sarah's assessment hit Marcus like a physical blow. Helen had indeed been planting seeds of doubt about their marriage for months before he discovered the affair. Casual comments to friends about his long work hours, his absence from social events, his emotional distance following some business setbacks. She had been building her defense long before he even knew there was a war being fought. How do you know all this? Marcus asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Because I've been watching from the outside for 5 years, Sarah replied. Because when you're invisible, you see everything. I've kept tabs on the family, on Helen's life, on your marriage. I knew about her affair with David months before you found out. I even thought about warning you, but I convinced myself it wasn't my place, that the family that rejected me didn't deserve my protection. The admission hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah had known, had watched his life implode from a distance, and had done nothing to prevent it. The betrayal felt personal, even though rationally Marcus understood her position. Why should she protect the family that had abandoned her? Patricia looked between them, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension. This meeting tonight, she said slowly. It wasn't random, was it? You sought him out. Sarah's silence was answer enough. Marcus felt the ground beneath him shift once more, another foundation of trust crumbling away. You planned this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The coffee shop, the conversation, bringing me here. You orchestrated all of it. Not all of it, Sarah said, her voice defensive but tinged with guilt. I didn't know Mom would be working here. I didn't plan for that. I wanted to understand who you really were. Whether you deserve what Helen was doing to you, or whether you were just another casualty in her path of destruction. And what did you conclude? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Sarah looked directly at Marcus, her green eyes reflecting years of pain and careful observation. I concluded that you're exactly what I used to be. Someone who believed that love and loyalty meant something. Someone who thought that doing the right thing would protect you from the people you trusted most. She moved away from the wall, her posture straightening as if she was finally ready to confront the truth she'd been carrying. Helen destroys people, Marcus. It's not personal to her. It's just how she operates. She finds the thing you value most and uses it against you. The words cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Marcus had spent months questioning himself, wondering if he had somehow caused Helen's betrayal through his dedication to work, his emotional unavailability during stressful periods, his failure to see the signs of her growing dissatisfaction. But hearing it from someone who had known Helen longer than he had, who had been on the receiving end of her calculated cruelty, offered a terrible kind of validation. Patricia sat in stunned silence, watching her 2 broken children, for that's what they were, despite their ages and their complicated relationship, piece together the wreckage of their lives. She wasn't always like this, she said finally, her voice small and uncertain. Helen used to be kind, used to care about family. People change, Mom, Sarah said, using the word Mom for the first time since Patricia had recognized her. Or maybe they just reveal who they really were underneath, all along. Helen learned early that being ruthless got her what she wanted. Dad's business success, her social position, her perfect marriage to a millionaire. It all required a certain level of calculated manipulation. Marcus thought about his courtship with Helen, how effortlessly she had seemed to fit into his life, how she had known exactly what to say and do to make him fall in love with her. At the time, he had attributed it to compatibility, to fate bringing them together. Now he wondered if it had all been performance, a carefully orchestrated campaign to secure the life she wanted. "The night I found you with David," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger as pieces of the puzzle continued to fall into place. "She wasn't surprised that I was there. She was prepared. She had already moved money, already consulted lawyers, already started turning our mutual friends against me. The affair wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was an exit strategy." Sarah nodded grimly. "Helen doesn't do anything without a plan. When she cut me out of the family, she had already poisoned everyone against me, made sure that even if I tried to come back, there would be no place for me. She probably did the same thing with your business partner, made sure he was completely dependent on her before making her move against you." The three of them sat in the aftermath of these revelations, each processing the implications of their shared understanding. Marcus realized that his presence here tonight, his near betrayal of his marriage vows, had been orchestrated by someone who understood Helen's methods intimately. Sarah had used the same calculated approach her sister employed, identifying his vulnerabilities and exploiting them, but for a different purpose. Not personal gain, but understanding, perhaps even justice. "What happens now?" Patricia asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. "Do I pretend I never saw you here? Do I keep lying to protect people who have already proven they don't deserve protection?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked at Sarah, this woman who had been erased from family photos and conversations, who had survived 5 years of exile and financial ruin, who had somehow maintained enough humanity to seek connection with someone she should have hated by association. He thought about Emma, his daughter who had chosen Helen's version of events over his protestations of innocence, who might never speak to him again regardless of what happened next. "I'm tired of running," Sarah said finally, her voice steady for the first time since Patricia had recognized her. "I'm tired of letting Helen control the narrative while everyone she's hurt suffers in silence. Maybe it's time people knew the truth about who she really is." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a spark of the fighter he used to be before months of betrayal had worn him down. "What are you suggesting?" Sarah stood up, her transformation from broken victim to determined survivor happening before their eyes. "I'm suggesting we stop being Helen's casualties and start being her reckoning," she said, her voice carrying a steel that hadn't been there moments before. "I have evidence of her financial manipulations, documents Rebecca left behind that show how Helen helped orchestrate my business collapse. I have recordings of conversations where she admits to destroying relationships for sport, where she laughs about how easy it is to manipulate people who love her." Marcus felt his heart begin to race, not with fear, but with something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. "You've been gathering evidence against her?" "For 2 years," Sarah confirmed. "Ever since I realized that Rebecca's betrayal wasn't independent of Helen's influence. My sister has been pulling strings behind the scenes for years, destroying anyone who might threaten her perfect life or expose her methods. She's not just a cheating wife, Marcus. She's a predator who feeds on other people's trust." Patricia looked between them with growing alarm. "You're talking about destroying my daughter," she said, though her protest sounded hollow, even to her own ears. "Whatever she's done, she's still my child." "And what about your other child?" Sarah asked, gesturing to herself. "What about the daughter you've been mourning for 5 years while she was actually living in poverty 3 hours away, too proud to ask for help from a family that had rejected her? Helen made sure you believed I was dead to you. She made sure everyone believed I was the villain in our family's story." Marcus watched Patricia struggle with this revelation, seeing the moment when a mother's love collided with the uncomfortable truth about the child she had enabled. He understood her conflict because he had lived it himself. The gradual realization that someone you loved was capable of cruelty you never imagined possible. "She'll destroy you both if you try to expose her," Patricia warned. "Helen has connections, resources, lawyers who have never lost a case. She'll make you look like bitter, unstable people seeking revenge." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged. But we won't be alone. There are others, Marcus. Other business partners she's betrayed, other family members she's manipulated, other women whose husbands she's seduced to gain leverage. Helen's left a trail of casualties, and casualties have a way of finding each other. The motel room that had seemed like a place of shame and regret now felt charged with possibility. Marcus thought about David, his former best friend and business partner, who had probably been as manipulated as everyone else. He thought about the other wives in their social circle who had always seemed slightly afraid of Helen's sharp wit and insider knowledge. He thought about Emma, his daughter, who deserved to know the truth about why her family had really fallen apart. "What's the first step?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with his decisiveness. Sarah smiled, and for the first time that evening, the expression reached her eyes. "We start with the truth. All of it. No more secrets, no more shame, no more letting Helen control the narrative. We tell our stories, we show our evidence, and we let the people in our lives make their own decisions about who they want to believe." Patricia stood up slowly, her movements those of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden and was finally ready to set it down. "I want to help," she said quietly. "I've watched Helen hurt too many people while telling myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I've enabled her by staying silent, by making excuses, by choosing peace over justice." The three of them stood in that small motel room, united by their shared understanding of betrayal and their newfound determination to reclaim their lives from someone who had stolen their dignity, their trust, and their hope. Outside, the neon sign continued to flicker, but inside, something had shifted permanently. Marcus realized that he had come here tonight seeking escape from his pain, but instead he had found something more valuable. Allies in his fight for truth, family members who understood the cost of Helen's cruelty, and most importantly, the recognition that he wasn't alone in his suffering. The shame that had brought him to this place was transforming into strength, and the family connections that had seemed severed forever were being rewired into something more honest and resilient than what had existed before. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, for the first time in months, Marcus felt ready to fight back.